folks, this is Will Lombardi and I'm at Capitol Arts Gallery in Quincy, and today I get to speak with Liz Ramsey and Suzanne de Martimprey about their work. They're the featured artists for the month of February here at the gallery, so while you still have time, come down and check them out. I'm excited to be here. Are you guys excited?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I want to know about your backgrounds because it's fun to read these.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I know bits about each of you, but to see this sort of all together, I think is pretty meaningful. So I want to talk about your art, but I want to talk about your biographies or your backgrounds first.
Cool.
And I don't care who starts, but it is fascinating to me, Liz, that you're a scientist, a photographer, and sort of an all-around free spirit, and it's nice to see how you put it all together. And Suzanne, I think of you as a performing artist, and so like to sort of discover your work as a visual artist has been pretty interesting as well.
Thank you. Same.
So what should we know about each of you?
Well, I'll go first. I moved to Quincy in 2016. I was studying opera in LA before I moved here. That was quite the experience. I grew up in Westwood, California. My parents owned the hardware store. And I went through the outdoor rec program here. I did some work abroad. I came back. Then I studied consciousness and human potential. And primarily, my biggest passion is music, performing arts. And my first album's about to come out. That's really exciting. And art was...
Is it under your name or is it Night Brain?
It's Night Brain, yeah. Group of 5.
You know I'm going to have to ask you about studying consciousness and
human potential.
And human potential. I mean, I study that every day.
Right, exactly.
And Liz, your background, you're a mycologist.
Yeah, I feel like that part of me has changed quite a bit. I guess that's a good place to start in how I got here. I actually had a kid in one of my classes today ask me, how did you decide to become a scientist? And it kind of hit me. I was like, I don't remember deciding. But growing up in Michigan, it's a lot more humid than it is here, and there's mushrooms everywhere all the time for the most part, except for in the winter. And I knew that if I came to Northern California, there would be a lot more fungi, and it would be just this miraculous experience. And then when I moved to Quincy, I was like, wow, there's really not that much more fungi here than there is in Michigan, and that's kind of how the birding started. Was like there was so much more biodiversity in observing birds than there was in observing fungi here. And as I've spent more time here, I've learned that it's about where you look, and also just a different climate here. But yeah, mycology definitely was the first thing where I was like, whoa, okay, there's a lot to see when you start to look around. But then the dryness of this place and the seasonality of the moisture being so variable made me stop really looking closely at mushrooms and start looking more closely at birds.
Isn't it interesting how way leads to way like that? You know, I know that I myself have gone from, fish to birds to flowers, for example.
Yeah.
But in both your cases, it sounds like art of some kind has always been a part of this larger holistic selfhood. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Like my sanctuary is that space of personal inspiration, and it's so fulfilling to engage that. And so the more free time I have, the more I fill it with things that I'm passionate about, and the more I am fulfilled and feel safe and protected and comfortable with myself and inspired. I mean, in general.
How does that work? How does the one form of creation, your music, fit with, or is it adjacent to, or interact with this visual mode?
As far as how I feel like I access and create through those different processes, they feel very foreign from one another. I think I would like for them to feel closer, but art and visual creation is much different than using like resonant creation. And
how so? Because in my mind, I'm neither, and it's just like, oh, her guitar's here, her brushes are here, and the song inspired but it's not that.
No. I with music, I think I have a different approach because you're actively sending out those little particles of information actively, where when you're doing something visual, you're packing it all into this one packet, and you're hoping that the information passes like flawlessly. And so, because
do
one
you
is
hope
very
that
engaging.
we, your audience, interpret this as intended? Are you suggesting that in music it's like this song says dance, this song says think about
And
whatever,
what are you going to do when it says that?
But in this case, it seems like visual art is freighted with audiences' interpretations as well. Is that part of what you're getting at?
Yeah. I think the reception as well as the delivery is really different, because with visual art I can step away from it and I get to observe the people observing it, especially since I work here. Which is nerve-wracking.
Oh my gosh, it's like
like, oh, don't talk about it. And so because of that, in performing art, I separate myself from the observation of it. And that's how I feel like I can perform best within myself, is if I pretend I'm not being seen. And with art, it's like, wow, this is going to be seen.
Yeah.
So
which is so funny because you're invisible here, and it's chiasmus, right?
Yeah, it's like adopting that opposite of how you're trying to present.
I started, to get back to my question, Liz, art has always been part of this larger umbrella of things you enjoy. When did it sort of take hold?
In middle school and high school, I was really lucky to have the opportunity to take high school classes in middle school. So by the time I got to high school, I had so much space for electives. And so one of the first classes I took as a middle schooler in high school classes was an art class, because they think, you gotta get that out of the way, right? So I did that.
Get it out of the way.
Yeah, so I did that, and that first art class I took, I had a few pieces that went to a gallery. They were chosen. I actually just saw, I got a Facebook memory today, and it was the little news article about that time that my photo, or my drawing, it was like a pencil drawing of a man looking up, and it was one of the first times that they had let middle school submissions go to the state level, and it was chosen out of 120 pictures to be, recognized, and that felt so good as a middle schooler. And then I started taking more art classes in high school and had multiple gallery showings doing hyper-realistic pencil drawings, portraits primarily, things with a lot of detail, really wrinkly old men, or really hairy faces, or hands and things like that. And that kind of just faded away, because at the time social media and visual art that you could easily consume through the internet it was still really growing. And I remember in this article that I just read earlier, it was Liz wants to do art when she grows up, but she doesn't know if the economy is going to have space for, art. And I really wish I would have known at that time the way that visual arts in our world has become so elevated. Like you go into like even just on advertising or on, you know, you see these incredible works of art all over the place, so much so that you don't even acknowledge it sometimes. It's just there's art is everywhere. So it kind of faded away, and I fell in love with science and mycology and started doing lots of you know, different outdoor classes or clubs and things like that, and that's kind of how it faded.
Because you deemed it more practical or
Yeah.
or having some place to go.
I thought being an artist meant you would go to school for fine art and you would
Yeah.
make art and you would have gallery showings, and that didn't seem like a reasonable career path at the time. Graphic design wasn't a thing like that. So it's always definitely been a part of me that I kind of, said, oh, you can't be a professional artist. You'd have to, you know, and have that be a side hobby that you do, and that's kind of how it functions for me now. I still draw and do watercolor, but it's a lot easier to put together a series of pieces with photography and explain that as art for me than it is to, I have like piles of unfinished artwork that's drawings or paintings, but it just seems a little less like something I can spend a lot of time on.
I'm fascinated by, you know, what you just said about ours being a visual culture. I think all of us know that, and I think, as you say, many of us have internalized it to a point, though, that we aren't quite even cognizant of the visual nature of the things we have surrounded ourselves with, right? And in particular, social media, but beyond that, advertising. And in my English classes, for example, I would begin a semester considering visual rhetoric, right? And analysis of an image. And my students, I've stopped doing that because, and maybe that's sort of, you know, my problem, but my students were not prepared for that. So on one hand, the visual nature of our society has increased. On the other hand, it seems so banal, perhaps, that we are uncritical about the images that we are creating and that are being created for us. Don't get me started. So, Liz, had that initial reception been less positive in terms of, you know, your middle school experience? Would it have fallen by the wayside just the same, or is this something that you carry along with you, as Suzanne says, that, you know, it's a safe space, or it's a space of reflection, and it's there with you?
Yeah, I think it would have. I mean, it's an ebb and a flow, kind of like those cool diagrams of, like, you know, your relations to different things in your life or people. You know, to counter that positive story, I remember maybe junior or senior year, I submitted a piece, and I had won and received positive feedback so many times that they had been like, they'd stopped letting me be recognized.
I see.
And so I was like, well, then what's the point, right? And so then there was a while there where that wasn't what I focused on. And then it was this remembering of, like, you don't need to put your stuff up in a competition and receive a ribbon for it to be worth something. And that kind of became my own, like, escape, like what you're talking about, is like that moment to be with yourself and create something for me, not for an art gallery showing that my teacher is going to pat me on the back for. And that's kind of how the photography has come to the forefront for me, is like, that's my, like, time to be in this, like, silent moment in myself, and try to translate that image to something to where somebody can appreciate it. Like, birds are not something that is easy to see and appreciate the details of, and it's so like fine detail too, that it really feels just like taking the photo itself is an act of art. And I could just go on about how many photos I just have sitting there in my computer. But then it also feels nice to allow somebody to see the details of the organism through the photo. in a way that they couldn't just with their bare eyes or even with binoculars. You could just spend time staring at it.
Yeah, picking out the details. I want to circle back to that, but I'm picturing you, Liz, in the field with your camera, birding. But Suzanne, I wonder, do you have a studio space that you're using? Is it a corner of your living room? Is in fact the guitar right there?
Yes.
Where and how does this work that you're showing here this month, where and how does it begin?
As far as location, the first few, this was my first one, and that one was painted. I sat on the floor and I put it up in front of me, and I had about 2 feet to work with, and I painted the whole thing just crouched in a position doing yoga poses sometimes. And now I have a nice studio area on top of a mountain that it's just very inspiring and very surrounded by nature. It's just in general very inspiring, and it is a corner of my living room, but it is a beautiful corner.
Yeah. So the site of the studio has changed. Has that precipitated different kinds of work from you?
I think I was able to understand the structure of how I wanted to create a little better, being in a space where my creative station was always set up instead of having to like clear it just to have space to live and walk around in my house. And so now I can, because I can access it so easily, it allows a lot more liberty to paint whatever I want.
So when you say the structure of how I want to create, you literally mean a more structured way of going about it, of having the physical space set up. How important do you think that is to an artist?
I think after a while it becomes really important because art is almost obsessive, and so likely you'll need space for that which you're producing. And so I think that is an important element of it. Like, I don't have enough wall space for all of my paintings. So
That's got to feel good, right?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
And so what, just accessibility leads to inspiration, leads to creativity, or it at least forces you to say, it's sitting over there,
Exactly.
right there.
Yeah, putting your passions out in front of you all the time makes you feel bad when you're in free time, not you doing something you're passionate about. You're like, why am I wasting my time? Look, there's my guitar, there's my painting. Both of those things fulfill me completely. And so just choose one and you won't be bored.
And yet I'm sitting here reading this book rather than,
Which I think inspiration, begins in the psychological process of, I don't know, my inspiration comes from conversations or a lot of mythology or philosophy or theoretical ideas.
Forgive me, you studied
Consciousness and human potential.
Consciousness and human potential. Is that sort of a seed for much of what we're seeing here?
Yeah.
Was that something that ratcheted up this type of creativity in you?
Yeah. Well,
and did someone point you there, or was it like, I'm doing this?
Well, actually, the painting inspired me to study consciousness and human potential because my dream is that one day we could palpably measure, using the scientific method, the exchange of information or energy between a piece of art and the person receiving it. And so when I was studying consciousness and human potential, we focused a lot on the physiology and psychology of sensation and perception and the processes that go through our body in order to translate that information into something that we understand and something we can consider real in front of us. And so, yeah, art pushed me towards that direction rather than the other way around. But yeah.
lucky you, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so Liz, you said you started with sketching or pen and ink, pencil. Photography came when?
When Instagram started. Like, it was like maybe 4th or 5th grade, you know, smartphones are a new thing here, like your first iPhone, and you have a camera in your hand all the time.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what is that about? And that was fascinating for me, and that was when Instagram was for photography, social media, and self-promotion, and that was kind of when it started. And then, you know, I think maybe like 5th grade, I asked my mom for a camera for Christmas, and got like, you know, your starter DSLR camera, and from there I just kind of kept, I would be the person who would be in yearbook and like taking everybody's pictures instead of playing the sports. And you know, that kind of just grew into whatever I was fascinated with would be what I was taking photos of. You know, where I live, it would be, or where I grew up, it would be mushrooms and sunsets, flowers and things like that. And then, yeah, it's just kind of changed as my interests change. I have different technological needs, and I have a really nice telephoto lens now and some videography equipment that I haven't been able to necessarily put to use, but would like to make a film about grebes this summer. So I'm just kind of...
So you would leverage your artwork, which is artwork, leverage it as a type of activism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sort of the classic photographic sort of way.
Yeah, I'd say if I had a dream job, it would be like photojournalism and like that kind of advocacy through really powerful, like you think of your National Geographic magazine and beautiful nature photography in there, and learning about film would be something I would like to do in the future. I think everybody can relate with watching some sort of short documentary, say at the Wild Scenic Film Festival, for
We
example.
had the short the local short film festival that Plumas Art sponsored, I think, last winter. Perfect place for it, right? I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation, but I'm trying to keep an eye on time, and we will get a chance to speak with each of you about a piece or pieces in a smaller format. But one thing that I did notice that each of you have done, because this is widely divergent work that we see here on the wall. What I see, though, that both of you have in common is, at least Suzanne and one, words on as part of the work. And you, Liz, are not letting the photograph stand alone. You are giving us something to chew on, I suppose, an access point. Can both of you speak to how language is working either in or with your artwork? Is that a good question to end on?
I think for me, when I use writing in the English language, I think I used it in the Gilded Seed of Madness as kind of just a way to represent, I love words, I love writing, and I would love to incorporate that more into my art. But I think it's just such a powerful way to put in packets of information that will be interpreted as somebody will, and you can just write anything. I think that's so beautiful. It's just like painting. Just put words in front of the other, colors after the other, and so how do you articulate the concept of a painting outside of just using the structure of the painting? And I think words are a fantastic way to embellish that a little bit.
And perhaps enforce your intent, or convey. Force might be a little,
I feel like when I used to do drawings, that was the hardest part for me, was putting a title. I always felt like I want to write something, and so with these, like I put the title as just the name of the creatures. But really wanted to spend the time writing, and I wish I could have spent more time kind of telling a story through the writing, or having a more cohesive set of photos and storyline kind of thing. But I did try to initially just put like titles, and it felt, I got kind of caught up in my head with like, what am I trying to
This is a kestrel.
convey here?
Or-
Yeah. But I think it's really interesting to, in your case, like you have a specific titles, and I love when I'm viewing art, like thinking that title in your head when you look at a piece of art, and then you go and look at the tab underneath and you see what the artist put, and sometimes it just enlightens you a little bit more, like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking, or you're like, oh, I didn't think about it like that. It just gives you something totally new to think about, and I had a hard time doing that with my photos, so I felt like writing a little bit about why they were the photos I chose, or those moments, how they felt for me, would make the person be able to relate to the photo more than just being like, oh, cool goose.
Yeah.
What kind of bird is that? Oh, we said it's a bald eagle. You know,
Yeah.
I wanted them to kind of think about that moment more, or learn something from it as well. Kind of
Sure.
educational
Yeah,
opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to speak about a couple of these separately from here, but this has been wonderful.